From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Gregg Ibendahl is back to walk through his new analysis of the fertilizer market impacts from the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He'll break it down by the primary crop fertilizer nutrients and how this situation has influenced prices for each. Following then, K-State's Bruno Pedreira to talk about nutrient needs for hay ground and why sampling for nutrient deficiencies might be a good idea there this spring. He'll talk about the typical nutrient extraction rates from hay production and strategies for replenishing those ahead of this next production season. Also, K-State's Mike Brouk with another edition of Milk Lines. All that here on Agriculture Today. Resuming now on this Agriculture Today, we'll pick up on more regarding the influence of the Russia-Ukraine battle on agriculture in Kansas and the U.S., and in this case, what's happening with the fertilizer market in the wake of that conflict. This is something our guest has just written on and posted that article to agmanager.info. Gregg Ibendahl is back with us, farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. Yesterday, we looked, Gregg, at the oil price situation and the response to the Russian-Ukraine battles. Now to fertilizer, and the word uncertainty is prominent in your comments here.
Yeah, surprising. Russia really, not only are they big players in the energy market, but they're also big players in the fertilizer market. They really produce all three of the major nutrients that we need, NP and K, and a big exporter on those kind of things. So really, if we shut them off, that is definitely going to have a price effect on the fertilizer prices.
Would it be best to look at this then by those three elements, NP and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or potash, as some call it?
Yeah, that would probably be the best way to look at this, really, because actually the U.S. is also a pretty big producer of at least two of the nutrients. Now, the third one we aren't, so we're dependent upon Russia to some extent, even though we don't get it directly from Russia. But, yeah, our potash situation is something I'm most concerned about, because that Russia is one of the biggest players there, and we hardly produce any of our own potash. So that potentially could be a problem going forward.
Let's come back to potash in just a moment here, but start with nitrogen. We're a little more self-sufficient in that respect, aren't we?
Yeah, now nitrogen is one of the good nutrients because we can actually make that out of thin air. I mentioned this morning that the ideal situation, if we could ever achieve it, I don't think it's ever possible. If you could actually breed a corn plant to produce its own nitrogen, just like soybeans do, that would be like the holy grail. That'd be like turning lead into gold type situation. Unfortunately, we don't have that. But the next best thing is that we have figured out how to take nitrogen out of the air. And again, the air we breathe, it's just not all oxygen. It's really about 70 or 88% nitrogen. We have figured out the ability how to take nitrogen out of the air and turn it into fertilizer. I mean, they came up with that process right before World War I. And since then, I think about every country practically in the world, has access to that technology. And as long as you have natural gas, you can do that. It's kind of a catalytic reaction. They actually burn the natural gas in the air. And I'm not sure how the whole thing works. You'd need probably a chemistry degree to understand it all. But anyway, they're able to produce ammonia by burning natural gas. And ammonia is kind of the building blocks of all our nitrogen fertilizers. So from ammonia, you go to anhydrous ammonia, and then you could build your urea and all those other good nitrogen products like that. So the ability to do that is a wonderful thing. It's not limited to getting out of the ground like the other fertilizer types are. And as long as you got enough natural gas around, which in the U.S. we certainly do, you can produce ammonia gas and make nitrogen fertilizer.
And so we don't really, as a country, import that much nitrogen?
Oh, a little bit, and I'm not quite sure why we're not totally self-sufficient. We may import a few fertilizers, but for the most part, we produce most of our nitrogen here domestically, and I think there is a little bit of unused capacity out there, so we probably could bump it up some. There really haven't been any major new plant announcements made here in the U.S. for doing that kind of thing yet, but that could happen. Now, U.S., the only trouble we face here with something like that is if you want to put a plant like that in, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to jump through, so we have that going against us. But really, we certainly have the technology and we have the natural access to natural gas, so we could produce more nitrogen here given enough time.
And looking at your paper here, just for the record of what little ammonia in that form we import into the U.S., 63% comes from, of all places, Trinidad and Tobago. 34% from Canada. Russia is not on the radar there.
Well, I mean, so yeah, we're not really, but again, Russia is a big exporter of nitrogen fertilizer too. So again, what happens there will affect our prices to some degree. We're not totally insulated from any kind of price shock.
Talking about phosphorus, the U.S., once again, is somewhat self-sufficient, a big producer of this element.
Yeah, we're like all of the other countries who produce this element. You have to have the stuff underneath your ground somewhere in the country. So, and we do, luckily. So we produce, for the most part, the majority of it. I think this last year we probably imported more than we have typically. But in the other years, we haven't really hardly imported anything at all, just a little bit of it. So luckily we're self-sufficient there, and I think Canada may have some supply too. So again, the supply of that nutrient is not going to be a problem, I don't think, for the U.S. Now, certainly prices are going to be affected too, because again, Russia is a player in that side of the nutrient market too.
We'll come back to that potash question, though, or potassium. And is that where our heaviest reliance on fertilizer imports from Russia would rest?
Again, not directly, because I think we get a lot of our potash from Canada, but Russia really, I think, controls about, well, when you figure Belarus in there too, really about 30% of the export market is either Russian or Belarus potash. So that is a good chunk of the available fertilizer out there. It comes through, Russia and Belarus. Now, we've already had sanctions against Belarus. I'm not really sure how effective they actually were, because we didn't have anything against Russia. So, Russia and Belarus being neighbors and very friendly to each other, Belarus could have just shipped all their potash down to Russia and went out the door that way. So I don't really think those kind of sanctions were very effective. But, if we were effective with sanctions like that, now, that potentially could take 30% of the potash off the market, which is definitely going to have a big influence on prices.
Well, let's get into then what the model that you've put together is telling us about the likely influence on fertilizer prices, and to the upside, unfortunately, here, but in what tangible terms?
Well, so from my perspective, I'm looking at trying to predict nitrogen prices, anhydrous in particular. And then really once I have that, then the other fertilizer prices kind of follow from that, because there's a very, very high correlation between anhydrous and everything else. So if you look at our main source of phosphorus, which would be like MAP or DAP, I use MAP in my model because it has a little bit of higher percentage of phosphorus. That has like I think about a 91% correlation. So, as you expect anhydrous price to go, you expect the MAP price to go. Now, anhydrous and potash are highly correlated as well, like about 0.66 correlation, but it's not as strong as the other correlation with MAP. Don't expect to see that follow quite as tightly as I would with the anhydrous and the MAP correlation. But if you look at those relationships, really, even without considering the whole Russian thing, when you have anhydrous about $1,500 a ton, and you look at the historical relationships between MAP and potash and anhydrous, really MAP and potash are priced lower than what they historically would be in a normal situation. So just from that angle of things, I think there's a lot of upside potential on the fertilizer prices of MAP and potash.
Then it's going to be an extra pain economically felt by producers, it sounds, as this shakes out, Greg.
I think so. No, I expect some increase on the anhydrous price as well, maybe not as much as the other ones for certainly, but potentially, with if oil gets up to like 150 or so, and corn, gets $6 or $7 or $8, there's a potential, I think, for anhydrous maybe to go up another 20%. Although, originally when I first did this anhydrous analysis thing back at the very first part of January, I thought actually prices were going to go down, but that was with the idea that oil was going to stay probably in the $70, $80 range too here. And I thought the $1,500 was too high, but it turns out, well, maybe it wasn't too high. Maybe that was really the correct price based on everything the traders were seeing in the markets for fertilizer. So maybe $1,500 was the right price before the whole Russian-Ukraine thing started. And if that's the case, for anhydrous to go up another 20% wouldn't really shock me.
When will these prices ease is the ultimate question that's on producers' minds now. And none of this is going to shift very fast, it doesn't sound, at least not back down to the downside.
No, well, just think about what happened, less than a year ago. We were at, $500 anhydrous, now we're at $1,500. So will we ever see $500 anhydrous again? No, I don't know about the next 2 years or so. Is it going to stay at $1,500? I still think that could come down. I think if the Russian-Ukraine thing would kind of settle very quickly and it doesn't last very long, then maybe you could start to see a slow decline in the anhydrous price. If they stay in the current active, war-like type footings, well, then maybe this is the new low. I don't know. It's, again, a lot of things have to shake out yet before we know which way for sure. I guess I can say with fair confidence, though, that I think farmers are stuck with $1,500 anhydrous through planting season. So I don't see that going away.
And back to your budgeting for the upcoming cropping season then, that sounds daunting. But if grain prices can hold serve here, there's still a chance to make this work?
Well, yeah, if you look at our budgets, I mean, with what we're forecasting for grain prices, high corn prices, even though, fertilizer now is, about 35% of our total crop production expenses, there's still money to be made there. Now, again, to me, it's a lot riskier situation than what it was because we're really counting on high grain prices and we're counting that input prices don't go any higher than what they have been, which is to me is a recipe for big-time inflation here. So high inflation for the U.S., you know how that ended back in 2008. We had a major recession and grain prices kind of crashed. So, yeah, there's a lot of more uncertainty in farming now than what it was, and it certainly wasn't a low risk thing to start with. We just added another level to that.
Tenuous times economically right now for producers. That's for certain, if anything is. And we turn your attention to the article that Gregg has just put together and posted online on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the effect on fertilizer. That's the article by title, and it's found at agmanager.info out of K-State Agricultural Economics. Good work, and keep it up, Gregg. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Appreciate the comments. Gregg Ibendahl. He is a farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back with more for you after these moments away here on the K-State Radio Network. Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. If you've been tuned in for the last several weeks, we've talked at length about fertility management for row crops heading into the production season, and certainly amidst that discussion, the high prices associated with commercial fertilizer right now and finding the most efficient way of utilizing those inputs. Another angle on this, though, on this segment, and that is examining the nutrition needs of our hay fields in Kansas and what management might be required there. Along with us now is someone who's just put together an article on this topic in the recent Beef Tips newsletter out of K-State Research and Extension. We're joined now by Bruno Pedreira. He's the Southeast Kansas Extension agronomist for K-State. Once more, we probably, Bruno, don't pay as much attention to the nutrient needs of hay stands as we do for commercial grain crops, do we?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Eric, for having me here again. That's always a pleasure to talk with you and people that are here listening to us. Yeah, you were right. One of the concerns we have is nutrient removal and then nutrient replenish. So we have it very clear when we are talking about corn or beans or cotton, all of the most important row crops, because we are always concerning what we're going to have in terms of yield. And so we take soil samples, we identify what we have in the soil, we try to figure out what we have there and what we are expecting in terms of yields. And that's not exactly the mindset we have when we're talking about hay fields. And this was one of the things I was trying to highlight in this article. Do we need to understand the soil? And the soil is the base of the systems. And, regardless of the crop we are talking, and I want to remember here that we are talking about forage crops. Those are crops as well. So I do need to understand what I have in the soil, and I need to have at least an idea of what I've been removing in the last couple of years to be able to build a good fertility program and keep having, really nice hay out of these fields.
Well, step one in knowing what one has in one's soil would be sensibly enough a soil test, would it not?
Yes, we do need it. And this is one of the things that I'm not seeing that much. I would like to see more out of our hay fields and out of our soils in general. especially with the prices we are facing this year, the fertility prices, it will be very interesting to have it, very important to have it in order to make good decisions. So please go out, take soil samples, send it to the lab. And we need to know what we have there in terms of nutrients, but we also need to know what we have there in terms of soil texture. Right. I need to know if we are working with a clay soil or with a sand soil. It changes a lot what we're going to do.
And there are easy ways to identify that soil type if one isn't certain. Considerable documentation on that out there that one can reference, right?
Yeah, we can send the soil sample to the lab and ask them to a texture analysis, which costs some money. But we also have the web soil survey that is available for all of us in USDA.gov. And there you can find it. US has a really nice soil map for the whole country. So it's easy to go there and figure out where you are, and you're going to have a really nice idea about what kind of, texture we are talking here to make good decisions based on that.
So that's baseline information from which to start. Before one gets into this, though, they need to come to a determination, you say in your article, Bruno, about what is that hay meadow for? What are the production goals here? And those can vary.
Yeah. Well, the question is, what are you going to do with the hay that you are putting there? Right. Are you planning to feed your animals? Are you planning to sell this hay? If you are going to sell, who's going to buy it? The guy who's going to buy your hay, is he interested in quality? Is he interested in quantity? That's changed the way we fertilize our hay field, because I can have a hay field with 6% crude protein, if we are thinking about fescue, for example, but I can have an 11% crude protein hay. So does it change the way you sell it? It should. Most of the times it does not, but it should, because if you buy a 6% hay field, crude protein hay field, you do need supplement to feed the animals when you are using that. On the other hand, if you have like 10, 11, 12% crude protein hay, we will be able to feed most of the animal categories without need any kind of supplement. So it should change the way, the price you sell this hay. If you were putting some fertilizer here, managing in a good way to get the, leafy hay with much more leaf than stems, that was harvested the right time of the year. So we can change the way we manage the hay fields to get different crude proteins. People need to pay for it. If they're not paying for that, well, we need to figure out what to do without spending that much money to get the same quantity without being focused on quality.
Well, one big part of this equation, and you bring this out quite vividly in the article too, the extent of nutrient removal from that hayfield. It'll depend on the forage type in question here, undoubtedly so. But what can you share along that line, Bruno?
Yeah, well, that's a nice number that I like to have in mind. If we are talking about a tall fescue field or brown hay field, for example, we need to have in mind that we are exporting 12 pounds of phosphorus or 40 pounds of potash out of these fields. So in a fescue field producing like 4 tons per acre, we will remove 8 pounds of phosphorus and 160 pounds of potash. So that's more than a crop field with beans, for example. If you get out of your bean fields 15 bushels per acre, you will remove less than we are removing for a 4-ton fescue hay field.
That might surprise a lot of people, Bruno, frankly.
Yeah. So we need to have numbers like this in mind, because knowing that I'm exporting, 48 pounds of phosphorus and 160 pounds of potash, those are numbers that I need to replenish next year. I need to get them back there in order to keep yield. Otherwise, we will, depleting soil nutrient levels, and year after year, we will not be able to get the same yields. And important, Eric, more than that, when you have a fescue field that is not producing as much as we could, we start to create some opening areas. Sometimes weeds will take it over and we'll find room in that field, and then we need to struggle with low yields and a infested with weed fields. And that's not good. We don't want to get there to start to do something with our hay fields, because it will cost too much and will take too much time to get it back to what we have in the past.
Well, Bruno, all of this obviously applies to managing tame pastures. Can the same be said for native hay stands as well?
Well, yeah. The point with native is the removal is lower, will be lower than that. The removal we expected out of the native fields will be like 5-6 pounds of phosphorus per ton and 30 of potash. So the numbers are lower, and these plants, we will get lower response out of the native field. So that's important to have soil samples as well. But when we go fertilize natives, we need to go very, carefully, and the quantity will be much more small than what we can do with tame and fast.
It does revolve right back around to the basic step of taking a soil test. And that's what you want producers to do in the main, whether they're running a brome or a fescue as a cool season grass, or even if they're inclined to look at the nutrient content of their native hay stands. Why, knowing what they have at the start will then set the table for any subsequent management actions that they would take.
Exactly. That's the base. If I know the soil, I can build the program. I can understand the field. We will understand why we are doing that way. I visited a farmer this week, and he was struggling with a fescue field. And he already applied nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, for example. And the fescue is struggling to come up. That's a new fescue field. So we went through the soil analysis that he had done last year, and we figured out that pH was very low. So sometimes we are spending money with, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and we simply forget to take a look in pH, for example. So we need to take a look at all of it and make the best decisions based on the soil sample.
Indeed. And producers do have a look at this article that Bruno has written up by title, Understanding Hayfield Nutrition Management for Long-Term Productivity. It's in the latest Beef Tips newsletter out of the Animal Sciences and Industry Department at K-State. You can find that at ksubeef.org. Bruno, thanks for covering this with us right here. Always appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Eric.
He's Bruno Pedreira, K-State Research and Extension agronomist based in Southeast Kansas, and we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Well, how does productivity of the Kansas dairy industry stack up with dairy output in peer states? K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk offers a glance at that on this week's Milk Lines. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning how our 2021 milk production stacked up against the rest of the nation. A day or so ago, the Milk Market Administrator released the final numbers for 2021 and summarized those for us. As far as total milk production, Kansas continued to rank 16th in total milk production compared to other states across the United States. So very solid placing there for us. We look at per capita milk production. We were nearly at 1,400 pounds, which makes us a major milk exporter. 600 pounds per person annually is what is considered needed to meet the milk demand and dairy product demand of individuals within a state. So we're well over that average. Interesting thing to note is as you look to the southeast of Kansas, there are many, many states which do not meet the 600 pounds per cow production. So we have great opportunity to export to the south and also to the southeast. As we look at changes in per capita milk production over the last 5 years, comparing 2016 to 2021 production, Kansas grew by 22%. This production increase ranked us 5th in the nation in terms of this category. We also ranked 5th in the nation in terms of the total increase in per capita milk production, over 20%. As you look at the nation, on average, milk production across the United States increased by about 6.5%. So with Kansas increasing by 22% during that same time period, we are definitely a milk growth state. And based on the recent announcements of expansion of our dairy processing capabilities here in Kansas, we expect that to continue to grow, and very possibly in the next few years our percentage increase may actually rank us higher than what it does at the current time. As we look at where milk production is decreasing in the United States, again, it continues to be to the south and east of us as you look to the deep south. Except for the state of Georgia, which has seen some increase in milk production, as well as Florida, the rest of the states in that region, in general, are seeing large production declines. And in some cases, those are in excess of 20% compared to 5 years ago. So again, we continue to have opportunities to export milk to the south and to the east. As we look at production per cow, Kansas again ranked 15th in milk production per cow. U.S. average milk production per cow is 23,948 pounds in 2021. Kansas average was 23,826 pounds, so about 100 pounds lower than the national average. Those states which had higher production per cow would be states like Colorado, Wyoming, and Idaho in our region, and even to the south of us, Texas as well. So we do have some opportunities there to increase our milk production per cow, as well as grow our cow numbers, which would help us to increase our overall total milk production. One other thing to note from the data that was published is where we're at in terms of per capita milk production in the United States. This past year, we topped over 675 pounds per capita, which means that we are dependent on exports of dairy products and milk products to take up the increase in the per capita milk production. Unless we see an increase in our per capita consumption here in the United States, which generally goes up a little, but maybe not quite as much as what our production went up, we're going to be dependent on exports to take care of that additional milk that we're producing. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Many thanks, Mike, as always. And with that, our Tuesday edition comes to a close. Thanks to you for listening in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.